3 years ago, investors were throwing money at food tech companies, particularly those in so-called alternative proteins. Since then, funding has dried up a fair bit. Sales of meat alternatives have moved into negative territory in some markets, and some commentators argue that we've already reached peak alt meat. So what is going on? I'm joined today by 3 experts to talk about food tech funding past, present and future as AgFunder celebrates its 10th anniversary. So I'm going to bring them on my screen now. Great. Okay, so let's get started. I want to kind of summarize the last 10 years in food tech investing, if that's possible. Has it really dried up, as I suggested in my intro, or are we just seeing a kind of fall off across the board when it comes to sort of venture-backed startups? Who wants to begin on that? Maybe you, Dan.
Thanks, Elaine. So I think if we look at the very big picture, not just the past 2 years, not just the past 10, but what's happened is a lot more people started getting curious about putting their money to work into food as it relates to both CPG and technology. And when money became almost free 3+ years ago, then investors were just looking for a lot of different spaces. And one of those opportunities that came about was food and technology. And there was a run-up of, we could call it tourist capital, that didn't have as strong an understanding of the space. And they made a lot of investments. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that investing in food is a 7 to 10 year time horizon at the very least. Mm-hmm. And so we are going through a reshuffling right now. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a way to sum it up.
Okay, Lisa, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Dan just said. Investment, venture capital tends to work in pendulums, and that's outside of food, inside of food, kind of across the board. And what we're seeing now is a little bit of the pendulum swinging in the other direction, whereas in the past few years, the pendulum swung very fast and very dramatically all the way to the right, where we saw so much money from non-specific, non-expert GPs and investors in the space investing and putting a lot of funds behind a lot of different companies and not really looking for sustainable business models or true points of difference. And so what we're seeing now is an adjustment in the market. But the truth is that there's so much dry powder in the venture capital world, and particularly in general for food and generalist companies, climate has been receiving a lot of funds, but the money is there. What we're seeing is that investors are sort of holding back and they're kind of pausing to see what's happening with this market, but also other markets that they have exposure to.
Okay, and Tom, finally, I think you've spoken to me in the past about the hand-wringing phase of alt protein investments.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing. I mean, it's not unlike what we've seen in other cycles with technology-based businesses, right? There's fundamental tech, then there's a proliferation of brands that leverage that technology, and then there's a culling of the herd. There's a breakdown of those into the ones that either have something truly unique or get gobbled up by larger players. And to Lisa's point, we're starting to focus a lot more on the sustainable business models, right? Look at margins, look at SG&A burn. We need to get away from this idea, well, if we spend marketing dollars, consumers will come and buy our products. They did, but now they're leaving, and now we need to figure out why and what we can do to fix it.
So why have there been so few exits in this space? Anyone want to come in on that?
Is it realistic to think that there should have been, is the question, Jane. Yes. And again, outsized expectations. This is not a tech company where you're going to scale it to 50 million, 100 million users in 3 years and then hand it off to an oracle. Food takes a long time because you have basically, we always call it a 3-legged stool. You have manufacturing, distribution, and demand. And you have to scale at a measured pace. So thinking that any brand is going to reach $50 million in sales in 2 years, it just does not make sense. You don't have the capacity, you don't have the relationships, you don't have the demand. So I think it's outsized expectations that there hasn't been more profitable exits. I think what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of companies that are looking for ways to join forces, call it mergers, call it potential roll-ups, where they're able to leverage their respective brands or products, but be able to share the overhead and the sales forces and then start to drive real demand.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Tom?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a former CPG executive yesterday, and that's the exact thing we were talking about, right? These brands, you're not going to be able to leverage manufacturing synergies just because some of these products require differentiated lines, but you can certainly share the burden of your SG&A load, your leadership team, marketing, sales, distribution, et cetera. That's really where I think we can see some interesting synergies. And you look at large established food companies, their portfolios of brands. And they do that because they can leverage those administrative costs to address a number of different lines of business.
So, I mean, where are we now, Lisa? I mean, is money available if you've got a solid innovation, a good team, the money's just being more judiciously spent? Or, have we got to the stage where some investors are just kind of turning off the tap in alt protein?
Yeah, great question, Elaine. I think that where we are is a combination of both of those. There's enough dry powder, but investors are being very cautious in deploying that dry powder. What I am seeing is that there's still rounds that are oversubscribed, which are a great example of the fact that companies continue to be attractive. There's strategics, like Tom mentioned, strategics are investing in different partnerships in different companies, demonstrating a long-term interest. JBS just announced that they were building the largest cultivated meat facility in the world. So there's still forward progress from a strategic side. And what what I'm seeing recently in an interesting way is that the strategics are de-risking a lot of these companies, and then investors are coming in. Usually it's the other way around, where investors will gather around a high potential company, and then you'll see strategics dip a toe in. And now I'm seeing a lot of strategic interest. We just invested in a company that two really large strategics were the ones leading the rounds. And then the investors just flocked in and ended up being oversubscribed because they're like, oh, the strategics are in play. This is a potential exit opportunity. They're certainly interested in this space, and that lowers my risk. Whereas I've seen other companies that are doing well. However, the expectation for investors is that they're delivering on their KPIs, that they are increasing their revenues at a significant and sustainable way. And they're adopting a wait and see situation or technique where they're saying, okay, well, let's talk in 6 months. Here's the 5 things that I expect you to have been doing and have accomplished by then to make sure that you do have a good product market fit, that you do have a good consumer problem that you're solving. I know we're going to chat about this a little bit later, but I think some of the problems that we've been seeing is that a lot of the companies that have been struggling have been because they don't have a good consumer solution to a true consumer problem that they are solving. It's like, hey, I'm going to put this out there and I'm sure everybody's going to buy it, without really focusing on fine tuning what you're solving for.
But as a category, though, for alt proteins, I mean, is your investment focus shifting in light of these kind of changing trends? I mean, Power Plant Partners is now calling itself, I think, Ground Force Capital, and it's expanding from plant-based, catalyzing the transition to healthier, lower carbon and regenerative food production. Are we going to see more funds kind of shift to talking about, I don't know, climate tech or food as medicine and moving away from alt proteins? And what about you guys? Dan?
So I would say that it's not so much shifting away, it's also including all of the other challenges in food systems. We're starting to do that. And the reason being, in the past 7 years, we've seen a lot of the different pain points that our companies are coming across, be it in manufacturing, be it in raw materials, in processing, whatnot. And those are true challenges that food companies, not just alt protein companies, are facing. So as it relates to being mindful of our investors and being able to, at the same time, improve the food system and bring about good returns, we need to have a broader bullseye. So I think it's not shying away from one thing, it's understanding that it is a larger ecosystem. All of these things play together.
So I want to talk now about plant-based meat or meat alternatives more generally, because there's been so much discussion about this in the media. Have we simply massively overestimated the size of the prize, or is the category going through some growing pains? In US retail data, for example, we've got sales now double-digit declines over a period of several months, or along more than that. So, what's going on, Tom?
Yeah, you've seen a stagnation in product innovation. I think is where we're at. We had a proliferation of brands, and now you end up spending more money on marketing dollars than you do on product R&D. So you end up with stale products that aren't changing. You have single trick companies, whether it's a patty, a nugget, a sausage, a milk, an ice cream. It's really hard to battle the cyclicality of consumers buying. Right? We don't buy hot dogs 12 months out of the year. We buy usually for 3 months, and that's it. So that's great for those 3 months, but it sucks for the other 9 from a revenue perspective. Same kind of thing happened with the meal kit industry, right? It was a cool concept, but it turned into a fight for marketing dollars, and the product quality suffered, and the supply chain wasn't very well thought out. Same thing here. You have a highly fractured supply chain, multiple ingredients from different places. One place mixes, one place makes, one place cold stores, one place distributes. The margin leakage, it's almost unfair to these companies to be able to compete. And we as food investors expect, well, your food company, you should have double-digit mid-20s on a prepared food business, double-digit mid-20s gross margin. They don't have a shot at getting there. I think there needs to be a return to the fundamentals of the product. We are doing a lot more on the ingredient side, the structure side, formulation side from an investing perspective to try and solve for some of those gaps in that chain.
So Lisa or Dan, I mean, for those people that are saying we've reached peak alt meat, we initially had the market for vegans, vegetarians, and that was a sort of a loyal consumer base. And then in recent years, we've had so-called flexitarians, or sort of mainstream consumers, or however you want to describe them, who are kind of trying these products, and it seems that they've tried them and maybe they're not continuing to buy these products. I mean, are they just not good enough for the mass market? What is going on? Why are sales going backwards? Dan?
If you go back 6-7 years, there was very limited awareness of vegan plant-based products. So we have come a long way. So I think we need to start at the starting point. 7 years is not that much period of time. So we need to set expectations. Second, companies need to improve their performance. Sometimes they had a good product, but the quality of their manufacturing did not hold up. So there were different batches that weren't as good. So that needs to improve. The products need to improve. The labels need to get cleaner. And we need to build consumer demand that is consistent. So just because someone bought something once does not mean that they are now a consumer. They tried it either because it was a fad or their kid put it in the supermarket cart by mistake. So we need to understand what's a false positive and what is a true consumer. And those take time to build. So I think, again, we go back to the expectations. Companies need to improve. Companies need to be more efficient with how they target their consumers. And companies need to be, on one side, more scrappy with their operation in general, and allow for time to build up that relationship and connect with them.
Lisa, what's your take on why sales, at least US retail sales that we track, are kind of going backwards?
I think the points that have been made are completely true. What I would add is that pricing is an incredibly big factor and an incredibly big issue. I mean, many products that are out there are anywhere from 25 to sometimes 40% more expensive by weight than the products that they're trying to replace or compete with. And you have to be delivering such a clear consumer compelling argument in order for somebody to pay that much more money for your product, particularly in this day and age where there's so much uncertainty and the war is happening and inflation is happening and all these things, macro trends are affecting how people shop. And we saw that during the supply chain issues, some companies, food companies, decreased their prices as a result of these supply chain issues. But the truth is that so many more increased prices just because, and just put that straight down to profit. So you're seeing a massive downward push on consumers' wallets in terms of their total basket. If they would go to Trader Joe's and spend $250 a week typically to feed their family. Now they're seeing that dollar go up $50, $80. And they're like, wait a minute, like I need to, next time I come, I need to start scaling back because I mean, my budget is my budget. And so we are part of this macro trend where the consumer is feeling such a squeeze in terms of the food purchasing particularly. And that's affecting what they decide to buy. So even if they had decided that once or twice a week, we're going to have a delicious Impossible Burger or delicious Beyond Burger, they're not going to be paying that 30% increase all the time or as often as they would and had in the past, because they're having to make all these decisions about what their family would eat. And so you already have higher prices across the board for their typical products. And now plant-based in many situations also took increases in prices to relieve gross margin pressures. And then they're still, significantly more expensive. So that's an issue that this category needs to continue to work on and start eroding, is this significant price increase that a lot of these products have.
But when it comes to kind of the drivers for these products, I mean, Dan, for example, you talked about, the ingredients list and so on. I mean, is that a bit of a red herring, or is that, you see that in, headlines, these products are so processed and so on, but, I don't see a direct correlation between the performance of companies and the length of their ingredients list necessarily.
No,
We've seen
no,
some companies,
and yes. Again, there are no black and whites, and I think that's a challenge. If we try to put things into buckets, 300 million plus consumers in the U.S. Each consumer, every time they are having a meal, 3 times a day, most, they're making a choice. So sometimes they want to eat very healthy, and sometimes they are splurging on fast food. And so for each of these occasions, there is an opportunity for a company to capture that market. The Whole Foods crowd, let's just assign them that name, they're very ingredient conscious. People at other different price points or other different situations might not be as caring as what's in their ingredient. But we have seen an overall shift in the consumer mindset in the past 40 years towards a more healthy oriented type of food consumption.
Sure.
And I think that will continue. So that is a differentiator. Companies are paying attention. So I think that matters to a certain extent.
So as to how we fix this, a lot of people I speak to say, oh, it's a technological problem. We can just fix this by adding in some cell-cultured fat, or we can add in some muscle protein that we've engineered, using a microbe in a fermentation tank, and that's what's going to get us over this. Other people say this is not really about finding, the next tech fix. It's about, the fundamentals of running a business, building a good brand, and so on. Tom, what's your sense? Have we hit a wall when it comes to technology, or is this recent kind of softening of the market less a reflection of quality of the products than some of these other, macroeconomic factors that Lisa's talked about?
No, I think the softening of the market, and if we're smart enough to listen to the consumers, they will tell us the products, right? Customers in the U.S. buy food for price, but that's a primary driver for consumer behavior in the grocery.
I'm just going to stop you there. I'm just going to stop you there. Your signal's coming through a bit not great. So Tom has just pulled out temporarily to find a better connection. So we're going to carry on talking, and hopefully he'll join us again in a moment. So I want to talk about this issue of the price gap with conventional meat, Lisa. I mean, what will it take to close this price gap with conventional meat, and how important is that to the growth of plant-based meat, in your view?
I mean, I think it's critical and incredibly important. We've talked about how tech progress and tech advancements are needed to continue to evolve the products and to evolve the textures and to really hit what consumers and get to what consumers are looking for and delight them. But if you can't achieve that with a sustainable price, then you become a sometimes product. I just had a company that sent me an amazing full muscle product, and it tasted amazing. But each time you ate those products, you would have to spend $45. And how many times a week can the average person do that, or will be willing to do that, no matter how tasty it is? And so you really have to hit those price points in order to become an everyday, every other day product that consumers are reaching for, because not only are you delivering on the textural elements, on the ingredient, from an ingredient standpoint, from a taste standpoint, but you're also affordable and you're also within their price points. So I think that that's where in the next few years, the category as a whole will be focusing on, is getting those prices to be lower and getting those textures and tastes and just the overall sensorial experience to be better and better.
So I want to talk about differences in different markets. I've just talked about this decline in US retail sales, Dan, of meat alternatives, but in other markets, I mean, I think, in the recent earnings call, Ethan Brown at Beyond Meat, he was talking about the differences between the US market and some European markets, such as Germany. I mean, are you seeing different sentiments in different markets? And am I too kind of myopically US focused in my sort of doom and gloom intro?
So rather than talking about just a specific market in Europe, I would say in general, I think the awareness of the products, of the category, and of consumers wanting a choice is growing exponentially. If we look at, some of the leaders, the UK or the Netherlands, you will see options wherever you go for food. So consumers are including this in their diets with regular cadence. And we're starting to see other countries catch up. There's starting to be more consumption in Germany. There's starting to be much more consumption in Spain. So we're seeing that the awareness is there from the consumers. It just needs to happen that good products reach them in the way that resonates with them, and to Lisa's point, at the price point that makes sense. This cannot be a luxury item for it to become part of the day-to-day. And go ahead.
So with the technologies that are available at the moment, we've got extrusion, we've got sort of low moisture extrusion, we've got wet or high moisture extrusion, which is more expensive, and then you've got the chilled product at the end. We've got other technologies like biomass fermentation, but you still require big kind of steel fermentation tanks, although maybe it's arguably a simpler process and you can do that on a continuous basis as well. Then we've got some companies doing kind of more solid or semi-solid state fermentation. And then we've got new technologies that I read about, like shear cell and other things. I mean, are you seeing new technologies that are going to make products both, more interesting, but also cheaper from a production perspective? Or is there really only kind of one major game in town here, which is kind of, extruded pea and soy?
I think more technologies are finding their way into the market. I think it's going to be slow. My hope would be that at some point in time, governments start to really show up. If we think about any industry, automotive, telecommunications, infrastructure, whatnot, the US government has played a pivotal role, especially at the beginning. They continue to do so in terms of the food industry through subsidies of one sort or another. And I would hope that in particular for all proteins, we start to see some sort of support in terms of capital expenditures, so that infrastructure can be built out, that can be shared by the ecosystem, as well as in support for raw materials. This is a win-win situation. Obviously, the incumbents would prefer this not happen because they're going to be risking market share. But I think that is part of the equation. If we go back and you look at the story of Frito-Lay, chips, in the time of the Civil War, both of those companies, the Frito company and the Lay company, benefited in one way or the other from government support. So if it happened back then, and they were the very sophisticated technology back then, I'm hoping that happens again now. It's necessary for all industries at the end of the day.
Your thoughts on that, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that there's so much truth in that, and the technology that we have right now does need to evolve, and it has evolved. I'm seeing a lot of hybrid technologies where a company will start out a product and already be at, 80% delight factor with the consumer. They want to get to 120, as an example, percent in terms of delight and selection. And they're leveraging other expert companies in fats and solubility and different contract manufacturers to get the texture of different elements right. And so we're seeing a lot of these ancillary technologies come up that are enhancing and getting these companies the last 10 to 20%. So not every company has to reinvent the wheel and every single company have to come up with a new technology. And so I'm really excited about that, because I think that is what gets a company from good to great, is getting to a place where their margins are at a great place. They do have a competitive advantage. They do have a reason to win, and they can leverage externalized companies to completely delight the consumer and deliver on those things they're looking for. And new technologies are definitely going to have a role, and also hybrid technologies or help from other enabling technology companies.
Okay, so I want to look briefly at cultivated meats. We've now got products on the market in Singapore and also in the US, albeit in tiny quantities. But many commentators believe it's going to be years and years before this tech makes any kind of dent in the meat industry. How confident do you feel this is going to take off and that this is commercially viable and scalable technology, before the money runs out? Lisa or Dan?
Yeah, I can answer this one. I am very bullish about the cultivated meat category. And we've gone in so many, it's been a journey for sure. I think every 6 months we're having a conversation around, is this ever going to happen? Is this going to scale? Is this going to scale to a reasonable price? All these questions that we should be asking. But recently, for example, we just invested in a company called Clever Carnivore, and they have been able to, in a very short period of time, climb up the cost curve so quickly that we've never seen this in almost any other company that we've talked to. And companies like that, they just give us a lot of hope that technology could really help us jump. Like if you look at it's like looking at a race of anything, and you're like, that car's not gonna make it. They have this amount of time, and I can visually see that's not gonna happen in that amount of time. But you never really think about, what if there's a new entrant that comes in with completely new technology, or an even better car, or a faster path, or and once you start seeing those entrants, then you understand that the process is not linear. Innovation is never a linear process with the same sort of Mario Kart characters playing for the final medal here. And there's so many different elements where new companies, new entrepreneurs, new ideas come in and really give a lot of gas to what we think is the final timeline is going to be. And so I've seen enough of those lately that I feel like, okay, maybe this is going to happen quicker than we all have been estimating. And the other piece is, again, I mentioned JBS investing to build the largest cultivated meat facility in the world. They're not into their business model is not charity. They have to make money. So for them to have the confidence to lean in to do something like this means that the strategics are also invested, pun intended, in the success of the space, and that's going to help also build the bridge on the other side.
Mind you, we saw that in plant-based with the launch of the Plantera division that was then abruptly shut down.
True.
Some of these companies. Dan, do investors have the expertise to back the right horses in this market? There's not really a playbook for it. Nobody's done this at scale before. I think it was Nick Cooney at Lever VC said, I've got his quote here, if you made a Venn diagram of cultivated meat companies that have received meaningful funding and companies that have what it takes to succeed, I think there's only modest overlap between those two, suggesting that we've been throwing some good money after bad. And what's your sense of what's going on?
That always happens in any field. At the end of the day, that's why it's venture. So for some reason, alt proteins and cultivated gets put under a much tighter lens. Look at the dollars that are being invested, I think rightly so, into climate change. They have more digits. And the expectations that a significant amount of that money will not go anywhere directly is there. During COVID, we had a lot of companies working in overtime and a lot of government funding that went to develop whatever vaccines. And some good came of it, some did not. And that is normal. That is part of innovation. So again, if we're looking at it in a very minute magnifying glass, yes, a lot of money will not reach the desired results, but others will. And we are trying to shift something very, very important in terms of food supply, in terms of food security, in terms of the impact that we have 50, 100 years from now. So
Lisa, you talked about some of these companies, these kind of starry-eyed food tech startups that, feel very passionately about fixing the broken food system, but maybe aren't solving an immediate consumer problem. What is the immediate consumer problem that is being solved with cultivated meat, where you've got a product that to some consumers isn't quite as good as the real thing and is twice as expensive? Why are people going to buy this in the short term? Understanding that there are long-term structural reasons why this makes sense, but consumers don't think like that when they go to the supermarket.
Yeah, I think the interest or the potential that excites me a lot about cultivated meat is not necessarily only the fact that it's a one-to-one replacement to the existing products right now, because those products are not particularly good for us, let alone all the environmental things and issues and pollution and emissions and all that. Putting that aside completely for a second, and the fact that we don't have enough land to, make food the way that we do today because of population change and climate change and all that. Let's put that all completely aside and just focus on taste and texture and price. I think that there's, to your point, a limited amount of consumers that are going to say, well, it's meat. I already have meat. This is also meat, the same meat, and this is more expensive. So why would I want this? But here's where I think the value of cultivated meat is that you can make it better. So if you have a cultivated meat product, right, and you put a plant-based structure in it or plant-based ingredients, all of a sudden now you're adding fiber, you're lowering calories, you're lowering fat content, right? So you're having a product that is in an ideal situation, right, indistinguishable, very close to being indistinguishable in terms of taste with the incumbent, but it's significantly better for you and your family, right? And there's so many people out there that they start having issues with their health and chronic diseases. They go to their doctor. First thing they say is stop eating that red meat. Why? Because it's not great for you. So think about a future where these products can continuously get improved in terms of what they're delivering to the consumer from an ingredient and nutrition standpoint.
But it kind of sounds a bit like you're saying the thing that would make cultivated meat better is a bit of plant-based meat. And we've already seen that the message around plant-based meat, the potential health benefits doesn't seem to be moving the needle for consumers. So is that really going to drive people?
I'll give another parallel. Sorry. Think about organics, where they were in the late 90s. As niche a category as possible, people were saying, why am I going to pay 3 times the amount for this apple?
Sure.
And then the awareness of pesticides. And then it starts to disseminate and people start to understand the relationship between harmful ingredients and their bodies. We have a lot of parallels in terms of everything that animals are fed in terms of the different steroids that they receive. And so these are some of the parallels I think that Lisa is referring to. So it will start out niche. It will start at a premium price point, definitely. As these companies grow in scale, they are able to lower their costs. And more people will join about. Companies are having different strategies. Some, like Luna Lu, is going for toro, the belly of the fat of the tuna fish. Others are going for more affordable products, chicken breasts, whatnot. But in all of these cases, there is a value proposition to consumers around what they're putting into their bodies and where it's coming from and the impact.
Okay, so I want to kind of switch gears a bit to talk about precision fermentation, plant cell culture, molecular farming. Taking precision fermentation, so you've got these big fermentation tanks, you're engineering microbes to produce a bunch of ingredients, feeding them some kind of carbon source. Do the economics really add up, or only for certain very high value ingredients like lactoferrin? If you're producing more of a commodity dairy protein, for example, does this kind of stack up?
I think it will.
I'm sorry?
I think it will.
Yes, yeah.
But I think, again, very, very early stages. I think sometimes some companies might have gone to market slightly earlier than they should have, or sometimes companies, because they had so much money, did a lot of testing and very expensive, inefficient use of resources. And I don't blame any individual company or person. I think it was just part of the ecosystem. There was so much money that was abound. To a certain extent, founders had the expectation that 18 to 24 months down the line, when they needed more money, more would be available at a higher valuation. And so we were in the ecosystem was in this cycle of just throw money at it to solve it, rather than be very, very diligent and do a very limited amount of testing to find the solution. So I think there is a big promise to all the different types of fermentation and the technologies that you referenced, but it's going to take time.
Lisa, your thoughts about precision fermentation, and again, is a lot going to depend on finding cheaper or more sustainable feedstocks, or moving to a more continuous fermentation process so you don't have to have such massive, tanks and so on? Or
I think it's going to be a combination of all of those. And I agree with Dan that we will get there. We have companies that we invested in in our first fund, we're in our third fund, that were in precision fermentation. And they are now starting to get to a place where they are a very small premium over the conventional products, as opposed to a very big premium. But they are amazing, incredible products. There's one company that we have that is making mycelium, mushroom bacon. And they have only 3 ingredients: mushroom, salt, and umami taste. And that's it. And it tastes like bacon. It's delicious. You could eat it 700 times a day if you wanted to. And they have worked really hard on the things that you're saying, Elaine, the feedstocks, the types of species of mycelium that they're using. I mean, how the process goes, like all that has been worked over almost a decade. It will take time, but it has so much promise because it delivers on that textural, taste, and nutritional elements all together. So these companies are really focusing on getting that done at a lower price.
What about so-called molecular farming? So engineering soybeans or corn or lettuce or barley or other plants to produce some of these high-value ingredients without having to spend, all that capex on big fermentation tanks. Is that an interesting kind of technology, or do you then have other problems like regulatory challenges and allergen management and all that kind of stuff?
There'll always be work to do. But our experience has been that there is promise in those technologies. They're very early stage. We need to, the companies themselves need to improve their yields, and they need to be realistic. I think a lot of money has been misspent on branding and on just promoting a company before they were ready.
Yes.
So sometimes you just have to work at it and have the expectation of time, and that it's going to be a much longer road. And here is where companies working with the strategics is where it makes a lot of sense. So being able to play well with others and share your technology and not try to own the whole value chain, I think, is one of the biggest learning lessons.
What about plant cell culture? So we've written about a few startups in this space where people are taking plant cells and producing some high value ingredients, whether it's cocoa polyphenols or aloe vera kind of components, and saying that these have more potential to produce more complex ingredients, botanicals and so on, that you can't make in a yeast cell, for example. Does this have interesting potential?
Some of the ones that I've seen, there is no reason for them to exist in terms of the market, because some of the products that they've been trying to replace are really very inexpensive. So I think a technology in search of a solution to find is one way to look at it. But I think the overall theme that I think is important to remember is that there's still a lot left to do in food to improve the systems.
How about you, Lisa? I mean, some of the companies I speak to talk about, challenges in botanical supply chains. And again, where you've got a market where there's already an established market for the botanical, but, weather, war, climate change, whatever, is making that much more expensive or just more volatile.
Yeah, we've been looking at other companies in the food supply chain that have or will have really significant problems because of climate change and other external pressures, and that do have very attractive, whether it be high dollar margins or markets, or they are such gigantic addressable markets that having great solutions in there would make for a great company. Chocolate, you mentioned flavanols, chocolate, coffee, like definitely botanics. There's a few areas that in the next 30 years, we expect the climate change to make the agricultural spaces where these crops are created right now, that they're grown, really difficult to grow in those spaces. And these crops are really particular. And so you have a really big problem, and we all like our chocolate and our coffee. And we're going to need to find a solution. And the strategics right now are scrambling to find solutions because the yields will continue to go down and it'll be harder to produce in these areas. So having solutions ahead of time that solve a problem that's coming, that have really large markets and profitable markets, is a fantastic combination. And we've been investing in that space.
I keep hearing this word strategic because it seems with a lot of these problems, these are long-term kind of structural problems. And, you know, maybe, for example, the average consumer isn't really aware of the challenges in the coffee or the cocoa supply chain. And they think, well, if it's just about sustainability, I'll go buy Rainforest Alliance certified or whatever it is, rather than this, you know, coffee or chocolate produced in a fermentation tank or whatever the technology is. I mean, and it seems like it's a long-term vision. I mean, is that the problem? I guess, as going back to Dan's original points about, you know, this is a long-term game. Is the financing kind of structure in place to enable some of these companies to take these technologies, you know, to market, and, you know, understanding that it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years perhaps? Or is that where strategics are going to have to come in, or even government?
I think both strategics and government have a very important place to play in this, because if you're a strategic and you're seeing that your supply chain of one of your main product lines that generate a lot of revenue and profit for your really big public market company, you need to find a solution, and you need to find that now. So when there's a problem in 30 years, you're not losing revenue or struggling. And so they are very self-motivated, which is great for the category, to find the best of the best and push them along quickly, and ideally probably absorb them at some point, buy them. And governments also, because it will be a general issue when a lot of these crops that we're all used to and love are not as available or incredibly expensive because climate change has changed the game.
So I want to end on a positive note. So I wondered if both of you can kind of highlight some technologies or categories in food tech that you're watching closely or you're excited about. So maybe starting with you, Dan.
Oh, you put me on the spot right now. And I just got blanked out. No. So categories, we didn't talk about them, but I think cheese and eggs continue to be a category where I'm very excited about what is coming. You know, obviously, in terms of the eggs, egg replacements provide so many benefits as an ingredient towards food manufacturers, into the food service operations, as well as into consumers. Obviously, the egg is a wonder of nature. It has a lot of functionality. It has a lot of nutrition. At the same time, there's a lot of challenges with it, not to mention the price fluctuations that we've seen over the past 24 months. So I think that category is ripe for continued disruption. And at the same time, cheese is, I think, another category, and we're going to see more and more different types of solutions approaching cheese. I think dairy in and of itself, we have seen a significant shift, and now milk replacements from whatever source are more a norm than they were 10, 15 years ago. And I think from milk, it'll go on to cheeses, it'll go on to yogurts, whatnot. So I think those two categories I'm very excited about.
Okay, how about you, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that I continue to be excited about seafood, frankly. I think in terms of market, I still am very excited about seafood. I mean, we probably all have recently read all this additional areas of concern about the currents in the Atlantic Ocean and the world and all that's happening there. I think our oceans are going to continue to see a lot of warming and a lot of repercussions on our fisheries. So having fantastic seafood replacements that meet consumers' needs and exceed those needs is going to be really important in the next 5 to 10 years to have those in place. And in terms of specific categories and companies, I think that cultivated, I'm still very excited about. And I mentioned Clever Carnivore is a company that to watch out for. I think they're going to be doing some really impressive things.
So kind of stepping back and with both of you looking into your crystal ball, I started off talking about, are some of these kind of investors turning off the tap with alt proteins? Are they kind of switching or, expanding to more climate tech and so on? Where do you see the money going? Obviously not just for you two, but, in the broader sort of investment landscape. Do you see that there's going to be continued investment in alternative proteins, or, where do you see the money going, the smart money going in the next couple of years?
I'd say across the whole value chain, from ingredients to manufacturing, waste reduction in particular, in the different parts of the supply chain, be it cold storage, being increased shelf life through natural means, and improved nutrition. I think those will be some of the areas. I think less money will go into CPG. And I think that is what's going to be penalized, because investors are going to say it takes a lot of money just to build a brand. So let's see something else.
Yes. Lisa, what's your prediction where the market's going?
Yeah, I think companies that really have competitive advantages as it relates to technology that can be applicable to different product lines or markets are really interesting and attractive, because, and I think Tom said it earlier today, you don't want companies that just have one nugget or one burger and that's all they can do and that's all they know how to do. You really want to have companies that have a significant moat that they can leverage from a technology standpoint into creating a point of differentiation for themselves. And we're going to continue to see companies that are built on a lot of fundamentals and that deliver on their numbers consistently in order to continue to get investment. But we expect to continue to start seeing the category regrow again, because the fundamentals continue to be there from a generational standpoint, from a climate standpoint, all the foundation of this category and why we were excited and are excited about it are still there. So we do expect the market to start swinging back and investors to start coming back too.
Fair enough. Well, thank you both on ending on that positive note, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.